Thank you for having me here. As you said, my name is Jamie Conklin. I'm head of product at Estrella. And as a company, we're trying to help commercial organizations and nonprofit organizations take all of the incredible data that's being produced in space and make it useful, turning it into insights. And I wanted to take a little bit of time today to reflect back on some changes and trends that we've seen across the industry, and then think about how we can make a case for producing insights and doing a better job of helping our customers. So as promised, let's start with some trends. Here's one that you probably won't be surprised by. Since the 1950s, our governments have been investing heavily in the space industry, and we now have what I would say, thriving space industry. And so the trend I'm trying to show here is that the number of launches per year has gone up, and in particular has gone up in the last few years. You know, sort of in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, you see that take off. I'll make a quick side note that I started working on ground systems and planning out the ground systems for 2012 to 2018 around this time frame. So I don't want to take all the credit for this, but you can draw whatever assertions you might. Another really important trend is that the cost of launching a satellite into low Earth orbit has come down about 99% in the last 40 years. This is obviously an enormous change, and it really allows the commercial sector to start exploring the value of space, and it becomes much more commercially viable now that we can launch things much more affordably. So this has been a huge trend in our world. And then the last one, again, probably not a huge surprise, but very correlated with that last concept, is that as the cost of going up has come down, the number of new space companies putting things out into space has gone up. And it's not just commercial companies putting up satellites to support the US government and other governments. It's commercial entities launching for commercial purposes. And so we see a lot more of that happening, and that's a really exciting trend that I think will move things forward dramatically. So all of those were pretty straightforward and not terribly surprising. And so now I want to focus in on one insight as an example. And this is an interesting example. So a little more than a year ago, the US intelligence community predicted that Russia would invade the Ukraine. And they did this. They put a lot of credentials on the line to basically come out and make this statement before it happened. But it serves as a really excellent proof point, because it turns out that that was right? And they used data that was collected in space to help generate this really important insight. Well, what made this possible? Well, first of all, there was data collected from space. We had satellite imagery, and we had other data that we collected from space to help inform us about what was going on the ground. So to inform us about movements, troop formations, and things like that. We had data collected on the ground. We had human intelligence, and we had a massive intelligence complex with decades of experience looking at troop movements, geopolitical events, military activities. And so we had a really well-trained community built around solving these kinds of problems. And on top of all that, we had a sophisticated infrastructure for fusing intelligence from multiple sources. You know, I joked a little while ago that, about when I came in and I started working on these ground systems, this was a case where the government was planning 10, 15 years in advance. What would they need to do? What kinds of foundations did they need to lay so that they'd be ready to handle all of the data that would be coming down, from satellites? And needless to say, I'm sure they've planned ahead and gone ahead with many different designs since then, but it shows the level of investment and the sophistication that the government has when it comes to making these kinds of investments. But the main point I want to remind us of here is that, data collected from space can be used to generate important insights. This is far from the first one we've seen. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of examples of this, but I think this serves as a poignant reminder of how important this using data collected in space can be, and how powerful it can be in informing our decisions. So let's jump back into a couple trends now that we've highlighted an example of a good insight. one that surprised me and has surprised me for years. As we've been growing companies, both at Estrella and in my previous careers, I've spent a lot of time trying to hire people to leverage geospatial data. These can be data scientists, they can be GIS technicians. I'm talking about people who understand how to process remote sensing imagery as well as movement data. All of these folks, there just has never been enough. And, when I go online and I look at growth predictions at, a handful of websites, I see that remote sensing technicians are expected to grow by 10%. Geospatial information scientists, 9%. Geospatial scientists to grow 16% from 2018 to 2028. Holy cow, knock my socks off. I'm sorry, this is not 9 to 16% growth rate here. What we're seeing is a massively growing industry with exponential growth in the sources of data that will be coming down. This increase in the number of people we have who know how to use these data is not growing fast enough. And as a guy who's tried to hire these folks, I can tell you it's really hard to find good people who know what they're doing with remote sensing data. So I would highlight this as a somewhat alarming trend because no matter how much we put up in space, if we can't use it when we get it back down to the ground, it's not going to have the same impact. So I think this is something we all need to be aware of and trying to figure out ways to support. So let's do a quick recap. We see we have a huge growth in space industry. We've seen the prices to get to space drop. We've seen the number of launches increase. We see the number of commercial ventures investing in space going up. And we see more and more examples of the value that can be created using data collected in space. But we still see this insufficient growth in the workforce. So that would be the quick summary of where I am so far. So this seems like a perfect time for the commercial sector to jump in, right? Because now that we've demonstrated how useful these data are, and we've reduced the price and we've got commercial entities coming into the market, naturally, the commercial sector wants to start generating these kinds of insights for themselves. So we have a space industry that's built around a military and intelligence complex, creating very technical products. And they now want to pivot and start making money by selling these products to commercial entities, to customers without a skilled workforce or without any institutional knowledge surrounding remote sensing data in some cases, right? So this actually is perhaps the most important trend that we're seeing and witnessing is the shift of focus from government to commercial. And that may at the first sound like a relatively simple shift, right? Instead of having customers that are governments, now our customers are companies. But I don't think it actually is that simple. And the reason I say is not only for the reasons I've stated right here, but there are tons of mismatches, right? The business models don't line up. Pricing doesn't line up. Product definitions are different. Data formats, delivery modalities, exploitation tools, acquisition strategies. None of these things are consistent in the commercial sector as they, compared to the government sector. A simple example, if you're a company and you have a product that's listed on a GSA schedule for the US government and you want to sell it to someone in the commercial, you can't sell it at a lower price than what's on your GSA schedule. So all of a sudden here's a contract created with the US government that actually changes the way we would have to interact with a commercial company. So I think there's a lot of mismatches here in this industry endemically. Now, yeah, I'll certainly agree that some of the new space companies or companies that haven't been historically government contractors don't face all these same challenges. But as a whole, the industry is very much caught in this shift of moving from a government-centric to a commercial-centric, or at least a commercial-inclusive trade environment. And not only do we have this problem, and all of these problems rather, but I would argue that at the end of the day, the customers don't even want what we're selling, right? Commercial customers don't really understand these products. They don't know how to fuse them and generate meaningful insights from them. And as I've pointed out several times, they don't have the technical talent to use them effectively. But more importantly, they don't want to. Companies want to buy imagery as much as consumers want to buy gasoline. we don't really care about the gasoline. We want to get from A to B. Well, commercial companies want to get these insights. They want cheaper operations, better market intelligence. They want to know what their competitor is doing. They want to be able to understand trends before the competition and to be prepared. They want to be able to make investments wisely. So at the end of the day, we're producing all of this fantastic products in space, and our customers aren't really well aligned with what it is we're selling. And it's not their primary business to convert the raw ingredients that we have in space, or the gasoline, as it were, into a fine meal or a fine product or destination. So I think it's really important that we always keep this in mind and figure out how we can work as a community to start addressing some of these challenges. Just to drive that point home a little bit closer, we've often made the argument that people don't really want to see a satellite image until they see the intelligence and don't believe it. Well, to continue with my running theme here of the conflict in Ukraine, when do people want to see the image? Well, the Pentagon comes out and says that a Russian jet collided with a US spy drone. Then Russia says, nope, that spy drone was operating erratically and swerved into the way of the jet. And then the US releases the footage. Now, you could argue, yeah, sure, this is PR and this is not really about wanting to look at intelligence, but you could imagine wanting to show your CEO a satellite image of a construction site. I can't imagine that many CEOs are that interested in that. What they want to understand is, when's it going to be done? How competitive is it with another construction project going on? So these data products are extremely valuable, but on their own, they don't stand up. They need synthesis with other data. They need aggregation and sometimes quite a bit of work done to them to make them turn into something very useful. Well, how does the intel community do it? If we say that our intelligence community is an example, and the government has been doing this for years, what can we learn from them? Well, in some ways we can say, we can look at it and say they've spent years solving these kinds of problems. They've built the infrastructure and they've experienced buying the systems because they're the ones who created the market in the first place. So is the commercial sector going to do all that? Probably not likely. And certainly not any individual commercial entity. So how are we going to get there? So I would argue that it's not that the space companies sell directly to companies, but instead that we build an environment where we have geospatial intelligence platforms. Full disclosure, Astraea, not surprisingly, has a geospatial intelligence platform. And what do we do with it? Well, we take data that we collect from space companies like Planet, Maxar, Umbra, Satellogic, and we fuse it with other data. We've got parcels, and we've got location data, and we've got information about points of interest, and we know where our companies have assets. And so we fuse all that information together, and then we can produce dashboards that help inform our customers on what it is that they're interested in knowing. And so now we've been able to take this raw product that's been produced in space and turn it into something meaningful. So in case I didn't do a good job of driving my point home, I'm going to sort of start with a somewhat exaggerated example, but pretty straightforward. Here is a satellite image that I downloaded, and I opened it up with 2 clicks on my computer. And I happen to have a GIS installed, not surprisingly. But I would argue that probably most people don't. But if they did, they'd get a nice shot like this. We have a picture. I don't know where it is. I have to do a whole bunch of other things, and I see about 3,000 buttons, and I only know what about 30 of them do. So, okay, so that's one view. If I just open up that same file in my image viewer, I get this. And actually, you may actually be able to see this through the Zoom. There actually is an image here. It's just not very clear. So that's not terribly helpful. So then I go and go back to my file and realize, oh, geez, you know what? They have a PNG in there too. I'll open that one. And now I get this, which is great. But I have no idea where this is. There's no context around this, and there's really not much I can do with this image. So this is what I mean by the raw product being somewhat not quite ready for demonstrating value. Here's that same image in a geospatial intelligence platform. Okay, so now we can see, oh, that image was taken on February 18th. We can see, if you hover the mouse over here, you'll see the coordinates, but you could also zoom out and see on a map where this particular construction site is. And you can actually see some of the information that people have started to glean from this intelligence. Oh, they're building a substation here. This is the laydown yard where they're bringing in all the heavy equipment. And, you know, maybe it looks like they've got some other equipment over here and they're doing some land clearing over here. A lot more. Not only that, but we can start looking across this timeline and moving forwards and backwards in space and seeing what's changed since a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. And so now we have a lot more contextual information right at our fingertips. So if our sole interest is this construction site, now all of a sudden we've got a lot more available. And oh, by the way, I didn't have to download a $250 or 250 gigabyte image and open it on my desktop. I could just view this in a platform and it loads really quickly by comparison. So we're starting to break down some of the barriers of getting from a raw product to something that somebody could use. I would also argue that while there's probably 20 or 30 buttons visible here, it's much more straightforward to use this than it is to use a GIS. Don't want to come off as being anti-GIS. I love GIS tools. I've been using them my entire career. They're fantastic, but they have every feature under the sun and they're complex. People get degrees in learning how to use them. And I think that, you know, for doing cartography and lots of different applications, they're fantastic, but they're not every man's tool. So as I said, if I was interested in a single construction site, maybe this view is great. But maybe I'm a Dominion Power and I want to look at all of the solar sites that are being developed across the state of Virginia. Well, now we can sort of zoom out a little bit and say, okay, let's look at all of these different solar sites and see where these construction projects are. So this is a view that I created that has all of the permitted solar sites. Some of these are operational at this point. Some of them haven't broken ground. And so we've got everything in between. But I'm still not at quite necessarily what insight I would want to be able to deliver if I was speaking to, you know, perhaps one of the buyers at Dominion Power, who is the major IOU, the electricity provider for the state of Virginia. You know, they're under a lot of pressure from the state to increase the percentage of their production that comes from renewables. And so they're really interested in how much capacity is there on their grid to handle that electricity and how much electricity is being generated from renewable sources. And so maybe they'd be more interested in this. You know, this is our best estimate of how much power is going to be coming onto their grid from these power plants from over the next 2 years and when we think that power is going to come on. And this could be a best estimate. So this is probably more along the lines of an insight that's helpful to answer an important question at Dominion Power or maybe the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. So this would be the aggregated results looking across an entire market and trying to figure out what is the net change or the net benefit that's being assessed here. We've got a couple other examples. Here's an example of doing some competitive intelligence where we wanted to look at the number of pieces of equipment at a handful of different sites from competitors and monitor how much equipment was available across an entire market. Here's another example we've put together for looking at real estate and comparing one industrial construction site to the industrial construction sites nearby so that we could understand where is it going to fit in the competitive landscape when the building is completed. So these are the kinds of things that I mean of producing insights and helping really move the needle forward. And to go back to where I feel like this fits inside the larger ecosystem, the pixel providers, the data providers, the sensors that are going up in space, the teams of people that are putting these satellites up are really, really focused on their capability and delivering a really excellent product. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily experts. In fact, it often means they're not experts in the ways that the customers that they could reach would want to use that data. And that's why I believe that this geospatial intelligence platform as an intermediary is valuable. Not only that, but as an intermediary, we work with many different providers. And so by working with all these different providers, we can combine these data together and we can leverage satellite imagery with SAR imagery with commercial signals intelligence or location data or parcels data. All of these different data sources can be used together. And that's a lot easier if you're not in the business of selling data yourself. from these providers, or excuse me, generating data yourself. So hopefully I've made the case pretty successfully that an ecosystem-based approach is going to be a viable way to help generate meaningful insights from all of the really awesome capabilities that are being put up into space today. And with that, I want to take a quick note and end with another example. This is an example of some work we've done with one of our partners. Satellogic is a satellite imagery company. They had some speakers earlier this week, actually, at this conference. And shortly after the invasion, we had several Ukrainian employees on our team, and we wanted to know what we could do to help. And we sort of thought around as a team and realized that we would need to partner with a high resolution imagery provider to provide anything useful and meaningful for support to people on the ground in Ukraine. So we reached out to Satellogic, and they said, you know, we were actually thinking of doing the same thing. We were going to push all of the imagery that we were collecting to a bucket and share it with NGOs and people trying to support the Ukrainian effort. And so we said, well, why don't we join forces here? We'll provide the platform, you provide the data, and together we've created what we call the Ukraine Explorer. So if you're interested, you can check out ukraineexplorer.earth, and this is an example of a project that we've done specifically with Satellogic. We've shared these data with many users, dozens of users who have supported answering questions about damage assessment. Where has damage been done to missile attacks? We've helped plan escape routes. We've helped exfiltrate families from difficult situations. There's been a lot of really important questions being able to answer from this. And again, I think it's a good example of how the data as a file in Amazon's cloud is probably going to be challenging to work with, albeit very valuable, but challenging to work with. But in a platform, we were able to share it with all of these non-government organizations, with people who don't have GIS, who don't have deep geospatial expertise, and yet they were able to turn that data into meaningful insight that helped them do really important work. So we're really proud of this effort and wanted to share that we had done it with Satellogic and made sure people were aware of that kind of work. So with that, I'll give you a few closing thoughts. If we're going to build this ecosystem, if we're going to have organizations that are responsible for launching capability into space and for processing that data and then turning it into valuable insights for our customers, we need this ecosystem. So how can space companies be good providers and support this model? Well, I would argue that having favorable partnership agreements with geospatial intelligence platforms, where we have no minimum annual commitments, we have reasonable margins, not saying we need all the money, but just a reasonable margin, and customer-centric business models. You've got to remember that many of these customers are just getting into satellite imagery for the first time and starting off with a, God forbid, $100,000 contract is probably a non-starter. So we need to have approachable business models that can support our customers and help bring them into the fold of the geospatially informed space community. Build interfaces using standards. I'll give a shout out to another one of our partners, Planet Labs. The Planet Labs team has been a leader in the STAC platform, the Spatial Temporal Asset Catalog. Australia also, we were one of the, we had one of our contributors was one of the top 5 contributors on that, and we're very proud of that work in helping build out these standards. We use the STAC interface for sharing our data and exposing our data to our customers. And we also love it when our pixel provider partners give us data using the STAC standard, because it makes integration a heck of a lot easier. In conjunction with that, having well-built APIs with that are robust, well-maintained, and well-documented, obviously is a really good stepping stone to having a good partnership. And then continuing to create high-quality products, which is what you guys are focused on. What the space community is really trying to do is generate really important information and data that can be then turned into the insights that our customers seek. So that's one side of the agreement. So how can geospatial intelligence companies like us be a good partner to you and to the space community? Well, we can share product feedback from our customers. Because we work very closely with niche groups of customers, we get a lot of information about how they want to use this data, what would make it more useful, how could we generate better insights. So we collect that feedback and we aggregate it up. And so we can speak across a sector or a particular market group and say, in the renewable energy space, X, Y, or Z would really make a big difference. And so we can share that feedback from customers. We can ask for features from you guys that would drive business for both parties. If we're working with agricultural customers and having one extra band, some of our providers haven't always had a near infrared band, and we've shared information about that, and they've been really responsive, and they've started adding features like near infrared to their next generation constellations. And that's really phenomenal. Now, it wasn't strictly our feedback, lots of other people gave that, but I think it's a really good example of how we can communicate and help our providers understand the needs of our customers. We'll also be developing solutions that leverage data from these providers. One of the things we'd like to do is generate value-added products and derivative products. And going back to the favorable partnership agreements, also having reasonable models around value-added products and derivative products is really important. For those of you who haven't dealt with that, value-added products are products that include the original asset. So it's a satellite imagery plus some information on top of it. Or whereas derivative products don't include the original product and just involve some piece of information generated from that or some insight generated from the product. Having allowances for both of those and business models that are well established for creating value-added products and derivative products is really, really important for companies like us. And the better the terms are, the more likely we are to go create those products and then consume more satellite images or other data sets provided. We're really, really keen on doing that. And lastly, we'll leverage your APIs to streamline and grow sales, which will reduce the costs on your side for fulfillment and our side for delivering these data quickly. So I think that there are things that can be done on both sides. Needless to say, all of this comes in support of answering the needs of our customers. And I think that by us cooperating well, geospatial intelligence companies and space companies, we can actually generate better products for our customers, which will turn around and generate better revenue. So that's it. That's the points I wanted to make. I hope that was interesting, and I appreciate everybody hanging with me until 4 o'clock on a Saturday. Thank you.